Call from Boston MA. Call from Boston MA.
Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council.
Call from Boston MA.
Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council.
Call from Boston MA.
Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council. Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council. Candidate Forum Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council. No. Are we ready to go?
We're ready.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council.
We're ready.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the State Senate State Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council. And Meg Wheeler with us tonight.
Good evening and welcome
We
to
are
the
fortunate to
State
have State
Candidate
Senator
Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the
Patrick
Hingham Unity
O'Connor.
Council.
and Meg Wheeler with us tonight. I'm getting a lot of feedback.
We
Yeah.
are fortunate to
I don't-
have State
Okay. I'm going to take over. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the State Senate Candidate Forum on Racial Equity, sponsored by the Hingham Unity Council. We are fortunate to have State Senator Patrick O'Connor and candidate Meg Wheeler with us tonight. My name is Ness Correnti, and as a board member of the Hingham Unity Council, I would like to provide you with some background on our group. Hingham Unity Council is a nonpartisan, nonprofit group formed to facilitate open, respectful, in-person dialogue about systemic issues that affect human dignity, with the goal of creating a more inclusive and welcoming community. We are part of the South Shore Unity Council. We welcome new members, so please visit our website at hinghamunity.org for upcoming events and more information on ways to get involved, as well as a bibliography of background resources relevant to tonight's questions. Currently, our subcommittees are focusing on issues regarding racial diversity and inclusion, socioeconomic disparities, and LGBTQ+ issues. I will now turn this over to our Racial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee member, Mark Bowles, who has kindly agreed to moderate this event.
Thank you, Ness. Forgive us for the technical difficulties. My name is Mark Bowles. I'm a business owner in Hingham with high school-age daughters in the Hingham public school system, and I reside in Scituate with my wife and 3-year-old daughter. I sit on the board of the Hingham Unity Council along with Courtney and my other fellow colleagues, as well as Ness's. And I'm honored to be able to moderate this event with two esteemed and well-respected candidates of the South Shore community. The candidates have been fully apprised of the format and ground rules. For the benefit of the audience, I will give an overview. Each candidate will briefly introduce themselves in ballot order. I will then ask them questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question. Rebuttals for individual questions will not be allowed. The questions have been prepared in advance by the Hingham Unity Council. We will start with the 30-second opening statements from each candidate. State Senator O'Connor, please remember to unmute and then introduce yourself.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Pat O'Connor. I'm the state senator for the Plymouth and Norfolk District, a job that I've had the honor and privilege of being in since May of 2016. I think that, well, first off, I just want to thank the Hingham Unity Council, Mark, Ness, Courtney, for having this forum today. And I think that we can all agree that over the past few months, it's been a significant turning point in our society, in a moment of true reckoning, in a shift of the way we think, speak, and act on the matter of race and equity. And it's become imperative that we all do our part to lift up systemically oppressed people and do everything within our power to make our laws not only work on the books, but also in practice. I really look forward to this conversation this evening. And I really do thank the Unity Council and everyone who's tuning in tonight and everyone who's spoken out, especially in the recent series of events. So thank you. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, State Senator O'Connor. Candidate Wheeler, please also remember to unmute, and then please introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to the Hingham Unity Council for hosting this important conversation. I know it's easy to think racism isn't a huge issue here, but I believe the most dangerous form of racism isn't the loud or overt kind. It's the subtle and systemic version that perpetuates massive wealth and power inequalities. The sociologist Eduardo Silva said the main problem nowadays is not the folks with the hoods, it's the folks dressed in suits. Systemic racism is a public health emergency, and it's critical that we be actively anti-racist by overturning institutional and ideological systems of oppression in our communities. I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight. I thank Senator O'Connor for being willing to take part in this, and thank you to the entire Unity Council and everyone watching.
Thank you, Candidate Wheeler. For those watching at home, this begins the Candidate Forum on Racial Justice among State Senator Patrick O'Connor and Candidate Meg Wheeler, both candidates for the Plymouth-Norfolk State Senate seat. This forum is brought to you by the Hingham Unity Council. There are 5 topics for this evening, so we'll jump into them. The first topic is education equity, and State Senator O'Connor has won the coin toss and chosen to go first. Very Belichickian of you. In recent months, there has been much discussion about updating school curriculum relating to U.S. history. Some want to see more comprehensive Black history taught with more focus on our country's early foundational reliance on slave labor and the disenfranchisement of and systemic racism against racial minorities. Do you believe the curriculum in the schools should be updated? And if so, what type of changes would you advocate for?
It's a great question. I do believe that education should be updated. It's one of the real focal points in what I think is the new 21st century education, which is that we actually teach our history and allow people to understand and to learn from that. One of the things that I took part in this past legislative session was co-sponsoring a bill for genocide education, to make sure that we all know that there is a history. And I think that there is racial bias in curriculum as it is right now, and we need to do as much as we possibly can. I played a large role as one of the final 6 writers of the Student Opportunity Act, which is going to be the largest single investment that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has ever made into our public education system, but it's specifically targeted to low-income communities and to underserviced communities right now. And I think as we're continuing to make these investments into where we see right now our biggest inequities in education in general, as far as a child in some part of the state can't get the same opportunity as another child in a different part of the state, then we have a major problem here. And I think as we continue to go through that and look at the education itself, we should do a complete overhaul and make things absolutely more equitable as far as education goes, and making sure that we continue to know that we have a history that needs to be taught and that needs to be learned from, and making sure that history is accurate. One of the last debates that both myself and Meg had happened to be on what was, in my opinion, formerly Columbus Day and now Indigenous Peoples Day. And we both agreed on that we should continue to move forward and progress as a society and not continue to teach things that aren't factually accurate. I think that we need to, especially now with media literacy and fake news being put all over social media, we as a government, and especially inside of our public education system, have really a responsibility to our future generations to make sure that history is accurate.
Thank you very much for that question. I also agree it's an important question, and I think you'll find that Senator O'Connor and I agree on the response to this. I absolutely think that we need to be updating the curriculum in our schools. I think Senator O'Connor and I are probably similar in age and grew up learning some of the false narratives that have frankly perpetuated racism in our country. What I would like to see are a couple of things. So number one, I want to see more of a focus on racially diverse curriculum. Not just in what is taught, but also where the curriculum comes from. I was disappointed to see, my understanding is the state recently updated its curriculum, and 10 of the 50 resources, historical resources that were recommended, only 10 of the 50 were actually from non-white writers. And I think that's a huge issue that we need to address. But I also would like to see some higher minimum standards for racially diverse curriculum. I've been watching as all of the different schools in our district are discussing how to incorporate this curriculum. And we're putting the burden on teachers to figure that out. And I don't think, frankly, that's the best way to achieve what we're going for. I also would like to see equity audits to ensure on a regular basis that our schools are in fact teaching culturally and historically accurate curriculum as well. And I'm grateful to Senator O'Connor for his work on the Student Opportunity Act, but without funding, which that bill currently does not have, it's a toothless bill. We need to ensure that the Student Opportunity Act gets funded so that we can support our communities and our students.
Thank you both very much. The second question in the equity, education equity topic is as follows. A study by the Yale University Child Study Center has found evidence of bias among preschool teachers, demonstrating that Black children are more closely watched for bad behavior and are judged more harshly than white children for the same behavior. A number of other studies, including one conducted at the University of California, Berkeley, found that middle and high school level Black students are disproportionately disciplined and that they are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended as white students and nearly twice as likely to be expelled. Other studies have shown that white teachers are also less likely than Black teachers to assign Black students to gifted and talented programs and advanced placement classes, even if their test scores match those of white students. The question is, what, if any, specific programs or policies would you advocate to address implicit bias in schools as it relates to disproportionate disciplinary action against students of color and the barring of students of color from academic advancement?
Great, thank you for that question. It absolutely is an issue, and as you pointed out, those 2 studies really highlight the problem. Look, I think I would support a couple of things. Number one, we need more educators that actually represent our students. So just over 40% of the students in Massachusetts are non-white students, but only 8% of our educators are non-white. And that's a huge issue. And I think that's the first step that we can take to ensure that, that our students are seeing people who look like them, that they're put in an environment where they are not the outlier. But I also think we need to address the massive school to prison pipeline issue. And you touched on it with the fact that students of color are disproportionately disciplined and arrested even in some instances for what are effectively disciplinary issues. So the majority of reasons that students, and especially students of color, are arrested or expelled are not violent issues. These are for things like swearing or speaking out. These are disciplinary issues, and we need to be investing resources into our schools to have more counselors, to have more nurses, to have more guidance for these students so that they can deal with the sort of emotional development that they need, and not putting them directly into the juvenile justice system, not setting them on a pathway to being a part of the criminal justice system, because we know that when students get in there, it follows them for the rest of their lives. It hurts their abilities to get housing, to get employment, and truly to affect the outcome of their lives forever. So those are 2 things I would like to focus on. You also mentioned higher achievement programs. I would support having a universal testing of every student to see whether or not they qualify for those programs, instead of letting people handpick who can go into those programs.
So Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points that Meg had made. I would add to that we should have an incentivized program for more diversity, not just in education, but in a lot of other areas. But since this is questions dealing specifically with education, I also believe in racial bias training for our teachers. And one of the things, and I'm not entirely familiar with that study, to be perfectly honest with you, but I will take a look at it and I will continue to learn from studies like that. But knowing firsthand what is going on in some of our schools, there is some really good things happening as well. When you look at the early college program that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts instituted 2 years ago, and I was proud to be ranking member of education when we did this, we have taken kids from high school that really come from underserved, low-income communities, and we've been able to provide them an opportunity to take college classes inside of some of our most underserved communities, some of our most underserved schools. And one of the things that we've been able to accomplish with that, just in the first year alone, is 1,100 students last year. We have them receiving over 5,000 college credits, which equates to over $1 million in college credits. And these are programs that we, as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, put in place because we know that there has to be more equity inside of our education system. And we know that the path for an individual in a community of color is a lot different than that from an individual who lives right here on the South Shore. And then we need to do as much as we possibly can to provide them as much opportunity that's out there. And the early college program, I would say, take a look at it. It's something that I believe is nowhere near, going to even the playing field, but it's something that we as a Commonwealth can do to make sure that we lift up our communities of color. And one of my former colleagues said that this is a game changer and the most important post-secondary education initiative that the state's ever done, and I was proud to play a part of it.
Thank you very much to both candidates. You both have touched on this to some extent, but we'll dive into it a little bit deeper. Across the state, significant disparities exist in funding of public schools. What, if anything, do you believe we can do to make this more equitable?
I honestly believe the Student Opportunity Act is the game changer. Megan alluded to it's not funded. That's a circumstance, unfortunately, of COVID. It wasn't that this was sort of an unfunded mandate that was put on. This is a 7-year investment that's going to be $2.2 billion and is going to provide really children the same opportunity that they would have in a school district that has a lot more means. And one of the things that the governor had said, and I believe it's a quote that he took from someone when we were at English getting this signed right before Thanksgiving of 2019, he said the talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And I'm a firm believer in that we have for far too long had one of the best public education systems in the country. I've read reports that say if we were a standalone public education system and Massachusetts was a standalone country, we'd have one of the top 10 in the entire world. But one of the biggest things that we had as far as a problem was the achievement gap and making sure that communities that had means were on an even playing field with the communities that didn't. And one of the other things that I played a role in, not just in the Student Opportunity Act being one of the final 6 writers of that bill, but I also played a role in the English Language Learners Bill, which I think is taking something that, in my opinion, was a racist ballot question in 2002, which allowed for sheltered English immersion to be the only standard in which children who were learning our language could learn, and opened it up to allow for this to be a way in which is the best way that they can learn our English language, not that we dictate to them how they're going to have to learn it. We're opening up opportunities in our public education system. Of course, everyone would want that these were done a long time ago, but we're working really hard to make sure that communities of color, that low-income communities have the resources they need to provide for their children that are in their education system and make sure that they have the opportunities to succeed, not just through this SOA or English language learners, but from things like programs like the early college system.
So look, school funding is something that's near and dear to my heart. As the parent of a 3-year-old, I care very much about this. As the daughter of a school teacher, I grew up learning and understanding that education is the foundation of everything we do in our lives. And we may have a great education system, but we are actually the 6th worst for racial equality in our schools. And a big part of that, I believe, is funding. There was a study a few years ago that reported that our schools are actually underfunded by $1.5 to $2 billion. That's a huge disparity right there. So yeah, we need to fund the Student Opportunity Act. But look, where we put our money is where our priorities lie. That's a really critical bill that the funding for has been deprioritized. I understand we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we are talking about the future of our children, and we're talking about the future of every child in this state. That right now, many are suffering because of massive inequities in our system. I also want to talk about early education as well. I put forward a few weeks ago a universal child care plan, and I think this is actually critical. This would ensure that every child in Massachusetts has access to quality child care at an amount that is affordable to the families. This isn't just a racial justice thing, but it absolutely speaks to that because it gets more families in a position where they can enter the workplace because they are now able to afford quality child care for their children. It also improves our economy by $4 billion. If we want to solve this racial injustice issue, if we want to solve these disparities in education, then we really need to start prioritizing education funding from day one, from the very beginning, pandemic or no pandemic.
Thank you very much. The next topic we're moving on to is criminal justice. In 2020, in a 2020 report, the Massachusetts Sentencing Commission found that Black people in the state are imprisoned at a rate of nearly 8 times that of white people, and that Latinos are imprisoned at nearly a rate of 5 times that of white people, and receive longer sentences than white people in prison for similar crimes. Ms. Wheeler, how would you frame this debate, and what is your position?
Thank you so much for that question. And I'm glad you highlighted those statistics, as troubling as they are, because that really speaks to the issue right now. Look, we have a massive criminal justice issue in this state, and it is perpetuating systemic racism. So here's how I would approach it. Number one, and I've already mentioned this, but we need to end the school to prison pipeline. And a big way that we do that is through prioritizing treatment and restorative justice and eliminating criminalizing our children. That's number one. Number two, we absolutely need police reform, which is, I think, contributing to this issue quite a bit. But we also need, in general, in our criminal justice system, to focus on treatment and rehabilitation over criminalization. I think the crime bill in 2018, which my opponent originally voted against, gets us some of the way there, but I think there's more we need to do. We also need to look at this through an equity lens. And what are some of these aspects, like, for example, expungement of records, which is something that was dealt with partially in the 2018 crime bill, that are disproportionately affecting, as you noted, our Black and Brown community members. And it's tracking their entire lives because it's affecting their ability to get housing. It's affecting their ability to get good jobs. And so that's a big piece of it for me as well. I also want to look at our juvenile justice system and also kind of the 18 to 24 age group, which studies have shown our brains are not fully developed at that age, but yet we are treating them like adults. We are throwing them into prisons and leaving them there. And that is not, in my opinion, the way that we truly address this racial disparity in our criminal justice system.
Yes, I know that Meg had mentioned, that I had originally voted against the criminal justice reform bill. That was the Senate version of the bill. I had problems with specifically a statutory rape component that I disagreed with heavily. And that was the reason why I publicly voted against it. And then as it made its way from the Senate to the House to conference committee, I was able to have some influence with Senator Tarr, who was a member of the conference committee. 4 provisions that we really didn't like were eliminated, and I was able to vote for the final version of the bill, which I think is incredibly important, because that's one of the most significant pieces of criminal justice reform that has ever been conducted by any legislature. And, just part of what is going on with those statistics, hopefully that what we were able to pass in 2018 is going to play a large role in making sure that those statistics aren't the way that they have come out in these studies. And one of the major parts of that is diversion programs. And I think that we need to keep our incarceration rate down, and we need to keep as many people who are not violent criminals out of our prison system. And then when they go through the system, we need to have an opportunity for expungement. I can't tell you how many times we've had people who have reached out to us in our office who have been restricted from doing so many things in their everyday life because of something that happened to them when they were 18, 19, or 20 years old. We are a society of second and third chances, and we need to be and represent that inside of our criminal justice system. That's why I was proud to take a final vote on that bill and be in support of it. And the things that are in that sweeping criminal justice reform bill were changes to juvenile justice, bail reform, diversion programs, access to expungement, restricting solitary confinement. All of these things during the final version of the bill that landed on the governor's desk, I supported.
Thank you both. Over the past several months, we've seen an unprecedented nationwide uprising against racist police violence. Some community leaders, activists, and politicians across the country have called for defunding police budgets. They argue significant funding from policing should instead be invested in education, mental health, affordable housing, and other underfunded social services. What is your position on this call?
I do not support defunding the police, sort of as it's said in that, but I do believe that we have an opportunity to make the investments that we need inside of specifically our mental health areas. Since I've been in office, we've increased the Department of Mental Health over $150 million. It's something that we continue to prioritize. And I think alongside what we are doing right now with our police departments, we can deploy the resources to individuals that need it in our communities. And at the same time, I think that we need to continue a focus on community policing. I think that Hingham does a really good job in being able to integrate inside of the community with the programs they have, the DARE program, which I believe you're one of the few communities in the district that I represent that still have the DARE program, to integrate into schools that way, as well as the Citizens Police Academy. I think that there are things that we can do to take away some of the concern that's in regards to some of these police departments. But are there racist cops out there? Absolutely. We've seen it far, far, far too often in our society, and there needs to be a certification system. That's why I was in support of what the governor put in place right after the tragedy that happened in Minneapolis, was that we put in place a certification system supported by the Black and Latino Caucus, supported by law enforcement, supported by reform advocates. Instead, in my opinion, the legislature missed an opportunity to really bring unity behind such a incredibly emotional and divisive issue, to bring unity behind it and to get certification in place, and then take that certification, take that bill, and continue to work from that, and take the next necessary steps we need to take to bring true equality under the law.
Look, where we put our money is where our priorities are. I said that before. And so I absolutely support putting more of our resources into our community programs, into mental health programs, into our schools. Right now, we have a state of our society where Black people are being harmed and killed at an alarming rate by law enforcement. And to act like this is just a minor issue that we can solve through some training or through a commission, I think is really, really missing the point here. The system of policing is broken. I think police and law enforcement can serve an important role in our communities, but I don't believe that right now the role that they are playing is the one that they should. if we want to keep our Black community members safe. Right now, they are being asked to take on the role of mental health providers. They are being asked to get involved in domestic disputes. Even in our schools, they're serving as law enforcement in our schools when we have a massive school to prison pipeline problem. So I do absolutely support diverting funds to these critical community programs so that we can focus on affordable housing. We can focus on investing in our education. Remember, we just finished talking about the Student Opportunity Act that is unfunded. So we can focus on mental health and treatment and rehabilitation programs, because that, in my opinion, is truly how we solve this issue. And we also need comprehensive police reform, which, look, I think my opponent has done a great job of trying to delay that important work. He voted against banning chokeholds. He voted to delay the bill by 6 months. You can argue about process all you want, but at the end of the day, I'd rather argue about substance. And it was an emergency legislation because this is an emergency. And it wasn't just George Floyd. It's thousands of Black people who are being harmed and killed because of police violence. And we need to do something about that now.
Thank you to both candidates. We'll now move on to the topic area of health and reproductive justice. A recent CDC study demonstrated that Black and Indigenous women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than white women, regardless of education or economic status. Do you view reproductive justice as a racial justice issue, and what would you do to address the discrepancies if elected?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I absolutely do view reproductive justice as a racial justice issue. And, as a mom and as someone who has gone through being pregnant and giving birth, I think the fact that there is a massive disparity in the treatment that white women and Black women receive when it comes to maternal health is disgusting to me. Let's talk about a couple of aspects of this when it comes to reproductive justice. So first, let's talk about the Roe Act, which is a really critical piece of legislation still sitting up at the State House that my opponent does not support by all accounts. This critical piece of legislation not only essentially codifies abortion access into Massachusetts law, but also removes many of the barriers that have kept people from being able to obtain safe abortions and safe reproductive health care. And many of those people are Black women, okay? And so this is a critical piece of legislation we need to pass. But let's also talk about healthcare in general. We have massive inequalities in our healthcare system. And, Serena Williams talked about this after she gave birth, that no one listened to her when she knew there was a problem. That's because we have inherent biases built in the system. And it's also because our system right now prioritizes profits over investing in our people. So it's why I support eliminating the middleman and having something like Medicare for all so that every single person has access to quality healthcare. It's why I support more transparent information about drug prices, no more surprise bills and no more surprise healthcare bills. And I think we also need to focus on the data too. We cannot change what we don't understand or what we don't track. And so we need to make sure that we're tracking the proper data for this so that we can truly understand the problem. There was a bill to form a commission to study this that didn't pass in the State House. And that would be a critical step in the right direction to ensure that people of color have the healthcare they need.
Just to quickly touch on some of the claims, especially in regards to the Roe Act. The Roe Act absolutely does not codify Roe v. Wade into statute, into the Massachusetts general law. Abortion is a right by our state constitution, but the Roe Act does not do that. I'm the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. I sat through about an 8-hour-long meeting on the Roe Act. I've also spent countless hours in meetings with individuals both in support and in opposition of the Roe Act. And I think that the biggest thing that the Roe Act does, and the biggest misconception of the Roe Act, is how directly tied it would be to Roe v. Wade. The Roe Act primarily deals with third trimester abortions and the access in which individuals have to that. Right now, it's rape, incest, or health of the mother. This would add into that fatal fetal abnormalities. In 2017, there was 21 individuals who accessed third trimester abortions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we're not talking about a whole lot of people. And for those people, trust me, I'm concerned about that and want to provide them that opportunity. But what this does is it takes that function out of the hospital. So back to this original question, as far as when we're talking about individuals in some of the most vulnerable circumstances that they could be in, you'd want that to happen in a medical setting, in a hospital. This would take that out of it and put it in a non-hospital clinical setting, which makes absolutely no sense to me as far as the other things, because this is a major surgery and could require the induced birth during this. So, sorry that we couldn't get to the question, but I wanted to answer the Roe Act one in particular. But as far as what we need to do, we need to do a heck of a lot more for individuals. And I'm willing to learn and listen and do as much as we possibly can, working with Manic Community Health Center, working on baby box legislation, and a lot of other things that we've been able to do for individuals.
Thank you both. And Senator O'Connor, you might have a chance to sort of add in this question. The CDC states longstanding systemic health and social inequities that have put many people from racial and ethnic minority groups at increased risk of getting sick and dying from COVID-19. Are there policy changes you would support to address this issue?
There are. I honestly think that a lot of what's happening right now, and I know in the previous question you had said regardless of specific socioeconomic factors, this one I think has almost everything to do with socioeconomic factors. We need to do more in order to protect individuals from communities of color and low-income individuals from this virus. And in order to do that, we've put a lot of financial resources behind trying to ensure housing stability, trying to secure food security, and do all of the things that are necessary. We spent a lot of money on making sure the testing centers were opened up in low-income communities so that people had immediate access to that. These are things that we absolutely, from the very forefront of this, in the first conversations that we all collectively had as a Senate, this was one of the first things that was brought up to our command center, who was run by Joe Comerford. The first thing we brought up was, how do we take care of our most vulnerable neighbors during this period of time? And I honestly think that we've done a pretty good job at it here in Massachusetts. And to be able to see some of the things that I've been able to see, not just here on the South Shore, but at a statewide scale, I've seen neighbors helping neighbors, and I've been able to, witness the resources the state is sending out to these communities actually be utilized. That's going to make people healthier. And one of the things that we need to do is not stop this, because we can't ever allow that to happen again, that we are in a situation that individuals, just because of where they live or the color of their skin, could potentially get sicker from a pandemic. But we knew going into this, from everything that we've put together, that this was going to be a major issue. And I'm glad with the state's response to this. And it's something that we need to continue to work on.
Thank you very much for the question. Look, I mean, Black people and people of color have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but this pandemic didn't cause this problem. We were seeing massive inequities before this pandemic. This pandemic just exacerbated it. We've seen massive disparities in housing and education, in sort of economic opportunities, and we're in this position now because we failed to invest in all of our people before this pandemic hit. So all of those issues still exist pre or post this pandemic. And this isn't just about, could we have done more during this pandemic? We failed our people coming into this. Workers making $12 an hour do not have the funds to have a savings account to afford a few months off if the pandemic means that they can't work. We have massive unemployment. We have people who are now being evicted from their homes because the eviction moratorium ended. we're still waiting on unemployment for a lot of folks, or in many cases, unemployment has run out. We need to focus on how to actually restore our economy, not to what it was before, but to an economy that's actually just for everyone. And a big part of that is healthcare. It's about ensuring that people have access to quality and affordable healthcare. It's why I'm a supporter of Medicare for all. It's why I will do everything in my power to have healthcare reform when I'm in the state Senate. Because if people are overburdened by their medical bills, if they're filing for bankruptcy because they cannot afford medical care, or worse, they're not seeking it. And that's just in normal times. And what do we expect when a pandemic hits? This showed us how woefully we are failing the people in our state, and we need to do better so that, God forbid, this ever happens again. We are not seeing Black and brown people die at an alarmingly higher rate because of this.
Thank you again to both candidates. The next topic area has to do with environmental justice. EPA research has shown that people of color are affected disproportionately by environmental factors such as air and water pollution, and suffer additional health problems as a result. What do you believe are the major environmental justice challenges we face in this part of the state?
Thank you very much for that question. Look, I think one of the biggest issues is that people who are in affected communities are not actually having a say. I mean, I think let's look at the Weymouth compressor station, which I know, my opponent and I both are adamantly against. This destructive infrastructure was cited in communities that, where children and families are being affected. And yet the voices of the many who said, do not put this, in our neighborhoods where it's going to harm us, were completely ignored. So as we're thinking about any policy that we want to put forward, or any climate action that we want to put forward, or anything that has any potential environmental impacts, we need to be thinking about environmental justice consequences. We need to do it with that lens. We need to make sure that the people in the communities being affected by this have a say and their voices are heard. They also deserve to have a say in how any revenues from these things are being spent, because ultimately it's their communities that are being affected. Look, I will take an intersectional approach to every bill that I write, and considering, everything from an equity lens and everything from an environmental justice lens, because so much of what we do has these unintended consequences, or perhaps even sometimes intended consequences, that are just drastically affecting people of color so much more. And it's causing them, as you pointed out, incredible health issues. And we really need to start thinking about every single policy that we put forward through this lens, so that things like the Weymouth compressor station don't happen again, so that they don't happen in someone else's neighborhood, so that more of our people don't continue to be harmed by these just disastrous policies.
I would agree. The Fall River Residents Against the Compressor Station, which is the main group that has launched opposition to the compressor, as well as all of us, and I consider myself to be part of FRAX, had to go and notify residents in Germantown of the various different public meetings that were taking place by pretty reputable organizations as well, because the notifications were not printed in languages in which they could read, and that's just completely unacceptable. And I think what you have with environmental justice, and I'm proud to have supported environmental justice legislation in the 2018 Clean Energy Futures Act. I support what's currently before a conference committee that I sit on as one of the 6 final negotiators of the 2050 roadmap bill that Representative Moschino has played such a large role in that. Representative Madaro has put in environmental justice legislation that I support in the final version of the bill, and have made that known. But this, in my opinion, as a local elected official who opposed this project since 2015, who was in a room where we were offered $47 million to drop our opposition to this project, to be down the street from it right now in my headquarters, where there's also a glycerin factory, a hazardous waste facility, 2 power plants. You see firsthand what special interests have done down in DC, and as far as what they're able to do to really change the regulations in their favor. And it goes completely against everything that I stand for, or I believe in, as far as what's happening right here on the South Shore and what's happening in far too many places in neighborhoods all across the Commonwealth, especially in communities of color, where you have large, big energy companies, whether they be fossil fuel or natural gas, who are running roughshod over neighborhoods and being able to, unfortunately, poison the air and water in which they have to use on a daily basis. And we need to do something about it. And I think it starts with reforming how FERC works down in DC. And you have to stop all the money coming into politicians from energy companies.
Thank you to both candidates. All right, we're nearing the end of the evening, and there are two remaining questions. This next question I will ask, I believe State Senator O'Connor is the one who will go first, but there's a slight bit of nuance, so I will ask the question both ways for each candidate so that they can answer it respectively. In the decades following World War II, our nation made unprecedented public investments to subsidize debt-free college education, low-cost mortgages, wealth-building measures that benefited millions of mostly white households. People of color, meanwhile, faced overt discrimination in mortgage lending and access to education. We believe that racial equity is achieved when outcomes in terms of housing, education, health, and wealth can no longer be predicted based on race and are improved for everyone. Yet 400 years of systemic policy decisions have put generations of Black citizens at a disadvantage. State Senator O'Connor, can you give us an example of a policy or a proposal that you championed that specifically addressed the needs of your BIPOC constituents? What was the proposal, and how did it help? And then Ms. Wheeler, if elected, can you give us a specific piece of legislation or a new policy proposal that you would champion in your first 100 days in office? And can you please outline how you believe it will help your BIPOC constituents?
So we, last budget season, we had an individual constituent that came to us, and a mother of two, a single mother of two, and she had just left shelter housing. And when you leave shelter housing, the next transition you take in the States to emergency assistance housing. And at that point in time, she was working, and she had to choose between how many hours that she could work, because she was going to go over the asset limit that was required to stay in emergency assistance housing. I thought to myself, this is completely illogical and counterproductive to trying to assist someone who's going through a really challenging time. And so working with Empath, which is a great statewide organization, we were able to change the emergency assistance shelter limit in a bill that I wrote, Amendment 872, I believe it was, to last year's budget, from 115% to 200% of the federal poverty level. And that's allowed individuals to make over $1,600 more a month while being able to keep their home, while being able to keep a home over their children's heads and not have to worry about taking on an extra hour of work, not worrying about taking on a promotion, where some people were refusing a promotion because they had to choose between succeeding in their field of work or being able to keep the assistance that they so desperately need. This has been something that I've been working on for 4 years, not just in emergency assisted housing. We've changed the area median income from 50% to 80% for childcare, and we continue to work on a lot of other issues that directly impact individuals, specifically in communities of color, who are facing real hard times and sometimes having to choose between going to work and getting the benefits that their family so desperately needs. I'm very proud of that work that we've been able to do on that.
So thank you for the question. Look, the two most expensive things that most families have to pay for are housing and childcare. I think, Mark, I appreciate you asking this and also giving the background. I just actually read a book, a great book I'd recommend to everyone, called The Color of Law, which really talks about what you were referring to. So housing and childcare, those are the things we really need to focus on. And you asked, what would I do in the first 100 days? I can tell you what I'll do on day one, which is to put forward my universal childcare bill. All the details are on my website, but to give you a very quick summary of it, essentially it ensures that every single family in Massachusetts can send their children to quality child care centers and pay no more than 7% of their household income. This is critical for every single one of our families, because this is one of the biggest costs. In fact, Massachusetts has the second highest childcare costs in the country. Families are paying anywhere from 25 to 50% of their household income on childcare. Imagine the wealth that people could generate if they didn't have that financial burden. Imagine the economic opportunities they would have if they could actually afford to put their children in childcare so that they could go work. I think this is critical to ensuring that we put, people of color certainly, but every single person on the path to truly being able to have economic equality in our state. And it's something that I will very passionately fight for when I'm in the state Senate. We've got to think big if we are going to overcome massive inequalities in this state and in this country. And that's why I am very proud to start with that universal child care plan. And it's why I will continue to be very proud to fight for other policies that help with things like affordable housing, that help with education funding, that help with higher education when I'm in the state Senate, because if we do not solve the massive inequalities, then we are not even remotely addressing racial injustice.
Thank you to you both. This will be the last question of the evening. I am a member of the Hingham Unity Council, and our organization believes that people and groups engaged in open and honest conversations are capable of change. I'm sure each of you has strong convictions on many issues, but I'm wondering if you can tell us about a time when you changed your mind on an important issue or topic as it relates to race, religion, LGBTQ rights, and equity. What was the circumstance, and what led to the change?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Look, I'm always learning. I don't know everything. So for me, a really important part of ensuring that we craft good policy is listening to the voices of every single person, and especially in this climate, the voices of people who have not been heard in the past. I can give you a very recent example just from this week. A constituent reached out and asked about where I might stand on this issue of folks with medical marijuana cards actually having access to guns, because right now our laws are unfair in the sense that because marijuana access is illegal at the federal level, folks here are not able to access guns, even though other people who, even though marijuana is legal here. It was an issue that kind of initially on its face, made me a little bit nervous. I'm as somebody who is very concerned about gun violence, I am, always cognizant of giving more access to guns. But it was an issue that I did my research on, and I spoke with members of our community to learn more about. And it's an issue that is disproportionately affecting our Black community members. And so for me, that was an issue where through learning, through having those conversations, through understanding those unintended consequences, which, I am proud to have done a lot of policy education in my time. And that to me is the key piece that I think a lot of legislatures don't pay attention to, is what are those unintended consequences of policies we put forward. So in learning about that and having those conversations, I was able to really come to an understanding of how we could change that policy so that it is more fair and equitable, truly addresses the needs and the issues of the folks in our communities.
I think one of the biggest ones recently that I changed a literal vote on, because it passed the Senate in the 2017-2018 legislative session, but didn't in 2019-2020. And actually through the process of the debates and an election cycle last time, I was able to really educate myself more, and was a healthy youth bill to provide more accurate sex education. One of the things that I had a problem with was the opt-in and opt-out. And, through the conversations that we had, myself and Katie McBride, I thought that it was one of the things that it wasn't as important for that opt-in, opt-out as the whole policy was. One of the things that I really pride myself on is that I'm known up on Beacon Hill to break from my party quite a bit. I was the only Republican to vote in favor of the millionaire's tax, which I believe is going to provide more educational and transportation options for our communities and communities of color. I was very proud to be the only one to vote in favor of banning conversion therapy, because after reading Boyer Race and after talking with so many advocates, there was just absolutely no way that I thought that that practice should ever belong in Massachusetts. Voting in favor of a study on Medicare for all, because I want to actually have every single healthcare option on the table, and that we shouldn't be restricting anything from being discussed, because no matter the political nature of it, because right now there's just not the accessibility or affordability to education that we absolutely deserve and need. These are things that I take pride in. I take pride in being independent and being a person who is pragmatic. I think in my process in which that I develop and look at policy, and how I take and share the stories and concerns and values of the people in this district up to me on Beacon Hill.
And that concludes our evening. A huge thank you to the candidates for your willingness to participate in our forum. We wish you both the best of luck with the election, and thank you to our live stream audiences as well. A recording of this forum will be available on the Hingham Unity Council Facebook page and YouTube pages, and the Hingham Unity Council website as well. The election is November 3rd, as I'm sure most of you know. The deadline to register to vote for this election is October 24th. In addition to in-person voting on Election Day, vote by mail ballots may be requested through October 28th, and in-person early voting began on October 17th and continues through the 30th. Visit the Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth website for details. Both to State Senator O'Connor and to candidate Meg Wheeler, thank you again for joining us, and remember to vote on or before November 3rd. Please also visit the Hingham Unity Council website at hinghamunity.org for more upcoming events, including a community read and discussion in partnership with the Hingham High School ADL of Beverly Tatum's landmark work, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? With that, have a good night. Be well and stay safe.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Meg.
Everyone, have a good night.
Bye.